Thanks everybody for coming today for this really exciting gathering. And when Chris first told me about this title, Complexity, Time, and Value, I didn't know what it was about at all. And I thought, well, I'll talk about diversity. I'm not sure how it'll fit into that. But as I've developed the ideas and even listening to some of these other things, ideas that have been presented, I keep feeling like, oh, it's all about complexity. It's all about time. It's all about value. You know, the last speaker that we just heard was talking about how everything is increasing exponentially, that the pace of change is increasing. And I think the question for a lot of us is, how do we keep up with that? If you're running a business, how do you keep up with it? In your own life as an individual, how do you keep up with it and channel it in a way that's valuable and beneficial instead of overwhelming? I'm going to talk about something I'm calling the new diversity. I'm working on a project right now. It's a history of diversity in the United States for PBS. And in delving into this, when I first came to the project, I had the same idea I think that most people have when they think about diversity. It's about skin color and race and ideally getting a group of people into the picture or to sit at the table. And if you do that, that's diversity. As I delved a little further into it, I got a little more complex idea, that it can be about other things. It can be about age and life experience and cultural background, sexual orientation, gender, educational background, socioeconomic background. Almost anything can add to diversity. And with that idea, I started thinking I had this brilliant idea that diversity really is about anything that makes you see the world differently than others, anything that sets you apart. So at an NAACP convention, I was thinking a Norwegian Catholic would be diverse. In the NFL, a black man does not add diversity, but an openly gay teammate adds diversity. A black coach might add diversity in the NFL, but we're moving beyond that. In Congress, I was thinking if you had somebody, what would it be like if we had I always thought, wouldn't it be great if Steve Jobs were in Congress? But I thought, what if you had somebody who's just a quiet, soft-spoken, highly talented IT expert in Congress? You know, wouldn't that be different? That would add diversity. So we could have fun with this all day. But the question is, why does it matter? Why does it matter if you get people of different colors sitting at the table, different race? Why does it matter if a double amputee runs in the Olympics? Or why does it matter if a black man joins the PGA Tour or assumes the presidency? Why does it matter? And I've thought about this a lot over the last couple of years, and some of the answers are kind of technical and probably what you would expect. There's an issue of representational fairness. You know, if 10% of the people at a college are African American or 42% are Asian American, shouldn't the images that the college puts out to the world represent that? And in some of the media work I do, we have to grapple with that. Shouldn't the faculty possibly roughly represent that? That's representational fairness. The other issue is structural bias. One thing we know is that study after study has shown that like attracts like. We like hiring people who look like us and promoting those people who think like us and act like us. You know, the guy who goes and has a beer at his boss's house is going to get the promotion ahead of the woman who doesn't drink, time and again. So shouldn't we be doing things to try to ameliorate that kind of cultural bias? We could talk about that for a week, and there's a lot that's been done on that in terms of affirmative action. But I found a more interesting answer to this question of why does it matter? And that is, in the 21st century, diversity is becoming the absolute cornerstone for success in the world. Diversity is what matters the most for strength in your organizations, for progress, for creating something new, for cultivating creativity, for managing complexity, which I thought about a lot during that last talk. This world is getting more complex almost by the second. How do we manage that? And diversity is one of the key answers. And the other thing is diversity is absolutely important for speeding innovation. You cannot keep up in this world. You cannot innovate fast enough if you have a business unless you have diverse inputs. You can't market globally enough, broadly enough, unless you have diverse perspectives at the table on marketing. So from this perspective, this new diversity, that, as I'm calling it, it's not about being nice, it's not about being fair, it's not about social justice, it's about being great. It's about pulling in new inputs to strengthen your organization, your community, your government, yourself. So let's look at it on a couple of different levels. Think about this. In the theory of evolution, diversity is the key. The only way progress happens is through mutations or crossbreeding. That is, you have to introduce difference into the equation in order for there to be progress. So the first little fish that grew legs was probably a lonely guy in his community. So were his friends who started walking out on the land and breathing air. They were different. They were outsiders, they were anomalies, but they were really important. And without them, we would not be sitting here today having this conversation. Think about that. If somebody hadn't had a mutation, some little fish hadn't had a mutation that grew legs, or thousands of little fish have those mutations, that separated themselves from everybody else around them, we wouldn't be here today. And we need diversity to survive. One of the most interesting things I've heard in the last few years came from Dr. Rao, a Swiss clinician who's spoken a few times on the South Coast. And he said that humans have more microorganisms in us from the outside world than we have human cells. In terms of diversity, we have, from our parental egg and sperm, we have 23,000 genes. From the microorganisms that come to us from the outside world, we have 3 million genes represented. 10 times more cells from microbes in us, in our bodies, than we have our own human cells. 100 trillion in our intestines alone. So this is really scary, right? The good news is they only collectively weigh 20 grams. So all the rest of us is human cells. But also, the other good news is that most of these are really healthy, beneficial cells. And part of the cutting edge right now, what he was talking about, is that in all these autoimmune, all these strange amorphous chronic diseases that are growing right now, Lyme's disease, autism, asthma, multiple sclerosis, diabetes, all these diseases seem to be linked to these microorganisms, especially in our intestinal tract. And what they're looking at now is that the growing use of pesticides and antibiotics, the growing prevalence of chemicals in our world are actually diminishing the diversity of these microorganisms within us. And that's making us more susceptible to illness. In this case, less immune diversity means less ability to be healthy. It's an amazing fact on that microorganism level. Let's talk about it on an individual level. I'll call this creative diversity. I worked on a project for a time about Ernest Hemingway, and I was really fascinated in this, that almost all throughout his life, he intersected with all these artists and painters and writers and thinkers who moved all the time. They all put themselves out on the edge and did things to enhance their creativity. Hemingway grew up in Oak Park, Illinois, just outside of Chicago, typical suburb. But every summer, his family would take a trip way out. They would go by boat, usually, up to Walloon Lake in northern Michigan. And it was about as far away as you could get from Chicago at the time. He never wrote anything in his life about Oak Park and his experiences there. His first 2 books, though, were primarily short stories about a young boy having experiences in Upper Michigan. That difference, those fresh inputs, are what fueled that creativity. When he was 19, he didn't go to college. He joined the ambulance corps in World War I and went off to Italy. He served in the ambulance corps, and one of his first novels that he wrote was A Farewell to Arms, based on that experience in part. He then went to Paris, as we all know, and spent time with artists there, but he barely wrote about life in Paris at the time. He would take trips every few months. He would go out someplace. He went to Switzerland and Germany. He went to Greece. Of course, he went to Spain. And he would come back to Paris and write about those experiences. So For Whom the Bell Tolls was written about being a war correspondent in experiences from being a war correspondent in Spain. Farewell to Arms, I mentioned Farewell to Arms. Sun Also Rises was about just 1 week that he took to see the bullfights in Pamplona. The fresh inputs the new experiences, the new sights and sounds were the key part of his creative process. And he also is interesting, I'll just throw this in here. His first home that he bought was in Key West, way out on the edge. Can you imagine in 1929, living that far out, and it's about as remote as you can get. And when the tourists started coming in, he moved to Havana so he could be more remote, and then later to Idaho. So this example is just about the fact that diversity fuels creativity. And you can think about that in terms of many other artists. George O'Keeffe leaving New York City to go out to Santa Fe. Norman Mailer out on the tip of the Cape in Provincetown, or Ansel Adams wandering the Rockies. Diverse inputs create unique perspectives and generate fresh ideas. The next level we can talk about is organizational diversity, or what I'm calling here performance diversity. I love Jackie Robinson. He's one of my heroes. And I know that that's easy. Everybody loves Jackie Robinson for what he did for race relations in the country. But I want to talk here about what he did to baseball. When he came on the Dodgers, he brought something new to baseball that had never been seen before. He had a different way of thinking about the game, a different style of play that he brought from the Negro Leagues that the players in the majors didn't have at all. He would bunt in situations where major leaguers would never think about bunting. He would especially steal bases in situations where major leaguers wouldn't think about stealing bases. He would get hit by pitches the other guys would dodge, or he would take a walk on a pitch that the other players would swing at. Anything to get on base. What he was always thinking is, I want to get on base and make things happen. And he did. He was Rookie of the Year his first season, 47. He was MVP of the league in 49. Both those seasons, he led the league in steals. Six-time All-Star. He stole home 19 times. And if you ever want to have fun, look up on the internet footage of Jackie Robinson stealing home. He would drive pitchers crazy and somehow get the home plate before they could tag him out. What I love about this is that the Dodgers brought him in because of race, out of a sense of fairness, social justice. But he changed them and he changed the game because he had a different way of thinking. He brought in a diverse experience, a diverse perspective. And after that, every major league team flooded the Negro Leagues to pull players out of there because they wanted that dynamic on their team. They wanted that new perspective on their team, that new style. And they had to have it to keep up. They couldn't compete unless they had players like this. Pretty interesting. The same thing is happening in the business world all over the world today, and especially in consulting. Consulting these days is all about building diverse teams that can tackle complex problems and come up with new insights based entirely on the fact that they can look at things differently than the company that's hired them. This guy's Olivier Fainsober. He's a transportation consultant at a company called Oliver Wyman in Paris. And he was educated in Paris primarily, in France primarily, but also at the Wharton School. He has graduate degrees from Wharton and from Tuck. And he told me that if British Airways hires him to upgrade their experience for European travelers, or if Lufthansa hires him to increase the efficiency of their routes, an aesthetic problem or a technical problem, he'll pull together the most diverse team he can. And he spends hours with those people talking to each other, getting to know each other before they ever talk about the problem. His job as a consultant, as a manager, is to manage the difference within these teams that he creates. And out of that, he's able to give advice to his clients that they cannot generate on their own. And he's able to come up with innovations that his competitors cannot come up with, and in a time frame that they can't come up with. That's how he makes his living, and he's great because of diversity, and he got onto this a long time ago. The last level is about the biggest, on the level of government, and I want to talk about, in our film, one of the things that we're looking at, it's a three-part history of diversity, if you can believe it. And one of the things we're looking at is that from the beginning of the country, our founding fathers set us up to take advantage of the diversity that we had in the colonies. And they never predicted what kind of diversity we would have ultimately. They couldn't have even imagined. But they set a system up that was made to handle it. We have an executive branch with four-year terms. We have a judicial branch primarily with lifetime terms. We have a legislative branch bicameral that's set up to have variation and fresh inputs all the time. So the Senate has 100 members, 2 from each state, and they have constituents for their whole state, right? The House has 435 members. They only have 2-year terms, and their constituents are more localized. It used to be that it was 1 representative for every 15,000 people. So those representatives would really know their constituents. Now it's about 1 for every 750,000, but it's still smaller. All of this is set up for continuity. There's supposed to be continuity in there. There's supposed to be turnover all the time, and also to have different viewpoints. And the whole system is set up to combine and arbitrate diversity and complexity for the country so that we can make the best laws we possibly can. And they knew at that time, the Enlightenment thinking of that time was that that's how you create progress. It's all supposed to work for the common good. Right now, just at the time when businesses are embracing this complexity, our politics seem to be retreating from it. It's becoming harder for people from different political parties to listen to someone with an opposing view. It's absolutely fascinating to me. And the result is this gridlock that we see. The system is breaking down. It's not functioning as it's supposed to because our legislators have stopped embracing the diversity that's always given us strength. And not surprisingly, the American public can feel this, and that's why Congress, that's my opinion, is that's why Congress's approval ratings are at an all-time low. The bigger it gets, the more difficult it gets, the more messy it gets, but also the more opportunities there are. Think about the UN and how that process is usually characterized. Think about the New Bedford City Council, our local select boards. It's always tough. Diversity is always tough. It's difficult. But what I want to say today is it's worth it. In New Bedford, in this area, Bristol County on the South Coast, we have one of the most perfectly diverse setups that you can have. If you think about planned communities, they try to plan communities to have this kind of socioeconomic diversity, the cultural diversity that we have, the business diversity, and especially the physical diversity. Where else in the country can you go that you have urban areas, rural areas, coastal areas, all mixed together? With that diversity, I think we can do almost anything, but how? The first key is you have to seek out difference. You have to be willing to go and look at people who don't agree with you. If you're on the New Bedford City Council, you want to go to UMass and talk to the planners, and you want to go to Spring Street and talk to the woman who's lived there for 60 years. Find people who don't agree with you and talk to them. Listen to them. Try to understand things from their point of view. And when you do, and if you can incorporate them into, get everybody's thinking together, the ideas will all be better and stronger. So this is the new diversity. It's about experience, it's about cultural background, it's about ways of seeing the world. It's about skills that have nothing to do with your skin color or anything else except what you can bring to the table that's different and unique. And if we can embrace that, we can do almost anything. I'll just close with this. Diversity has been central to our country since its founding, just like liberty and equality, even though it's often ignored. But I think that it's never been more central than it is today. And if we can bring that to our children, into our personal lives, into our communities, into our businesses, if we can insist on it with the people who govern us, our world will be better from day one. Thanks.